Welcome, everybody, to our town hall meeting. Thank you all for coming out. The weather is looking lovely out there, so I appreciate you coming out and braving it. My name is Andrew Setters. I'm the Director of Communication, Community Engagement for Loveland City Schools. And the goal of tonight is our town hall meeting. We had one on January 5th. We had a lot of good conversation, and the goal is to hear from the community, give people a chance to speak. Our school board has had discussions over the last couple of months about how during our school board meetings, they have public comment, and that's really for the public to comment to them. It's not really an opportunity to have conversation. And that's kind of the idea of tonight, is to give people an opportunity to ask questions, make comments, and for them to get for you to be able to get some feedback from our board members. You'll notice we only have 2 board members here tonight, and that's because if you have more than 2, then you've got a quorum and it kind of becomes a board meeting, and that's all the kind of stuff that we're trying to avoid, being able to have those conversations instead of having a board meeting. So the meeting is being live streamed. It's also being recorded, and we're doing that so people who can't be here tonight can still have an opportunity to see and hear what goes on, and be a chance, you know, if you couldn't make it, you have a chance to take a look at it tomorrow when we post it online. If you've got a question or a comment for the board or for Mike or for the treasurer, we've got an orange bucket over here. We've got some 3x5 cards. Write your name on a card, throw it in the bucket. We're just going to kind of pull names out of the hat. Try to get to as many people as we can tonight, but try to keep it loose and have an open-ended conversation. We're not going to be running the clock like we do at the board meeting. We hope that everybody keeps their comments kind of focused so that we can hear as many people as possible. But you know, I don't want to be running a buzzer or trying to end the conversation. I want to try to help keep it going. So I'm going to introduce the folks who are up here, even though you probably know them. We've got Rob Giuffre, who is our treasurer. We have Dr. Eric Schwetznow, MD, Dr. Catherine Lorenz, PhD, and Superintendent Mike Broadwater. Nothing. I think Mike is going to start it off with the presentation and a few comments, and then we'll get into to hearing from everybody. So thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thanks, Andrew. I don't want to take a whole lot of time. I told Andrew at about 10 minutes to give me the hook, but I do want to give you some information, just what we presented at the last board meeting and kind of where we are, what's led up to this. But first, if you happen to watch the board meeting, something happened at the last board meeting that I feel like I need to address. A resident addressed the board and implied that frustration and division over school funding has our community on the brink of violence. I don't believe that to be true. I also don't believe that a board meeting is the correct venue to discuss those kind of concerns. If a resident feels like they're being threatened, or if they know someone they believe to be at risk for committing violence, then the correct thing to do is to contact the police. The safety of our students, our staff, and our buildings is the district's greatest responsibility. That includes our Board of Education. I believe our community is capable of having difficult conversations like tonight about complex topics like school funding. Events like this town hall are an opportunity to demonstrate that we can have those conversations in a meaningful and respectful way. We have worked to hear as many voices as possible. I enjoy getting out into the community and meeting everybody. I do not want that conversation silenced. I also want our community to know that we take any implications of violence seriously. I believe in our community. I believe in Loveland and our ability to work our way to solutions together as a community. So with that, I apologize for having to make that statement, but I felt it was important after what happened at the board meeting. We want to have good conversation, and we want people to feel free to be able to express themselves. So I'm going to ask Adam, if you're all set, ready to go. If we go to the next slide, what I would like to do, if everybody looks at the side there, what I think it's important for you to know is what we've done up to this point already. If you looked at King's Local Schools, for example, they had a 6.4 mil levy out this past November that did pass, and they listed all the cuts, what would happen if it did not pass. And what I'm here to tell you is the cuts that they listed, we have already done. Okay, so we're past that point. We're now moving into a different realm that gets a little bit more serious, a lot more serious. But I want to update what we have done. We've had a significant number of staff positions eliminated. I'll go over that high school transportation in Loveland City School District, we are the 39th wealthiest district out of 607 districts in the state of Ohio. We do not have high school transportation. Participation fees are the highest in Hamilton County for our athletics. When you look at, we met with our boosters today and everything they do for our kids. A lot of what we do for kids in the extracurricular realm is self-funded through parents, a lot of it. Hiring practices, we've saved on salaries because what we do, if we have a retirement or a resignation, we will hire, instead of a 30-year veteran, it'll be 0 or 1 years of experience. Coming up next year, we're not replacing any retirement or resignation. We can't replace. We're going to maintain FTE counts. FTE is full-time equivalents. That's people. The contract for all of our staff this year was 0% increase on the base. And I hear sometimes, well, yeah, but you get steps. Steps are an industry standard that every union, every association has in the educational world. About 99% of the districts have that. But steps were not eliminated, but understand not every employee gets steps. Okay, it just depends where you are. ESSER funds that we received from the federal government because of COVID, we received about $5.3 million, and about $2.2 million of it was used to supplant salaries that we already had. We didn't hire new people, it was to supplant salaries. Alternative funding sources, the tuition for full-day kindergarten, it makes it is self-serving in terms of it pays for itself. Grants and business partnerships we're looking at, and again, the pay to participate. So the next slide, and again, I want to go through this quickly. If you have 3 hours, you can pull it up on the website and watch the board meeting. But I do want to get a frame of reference here. If you look at what I have up here, the first colored column on the left side where it says January of 2023, those are the FTEs that we have currently. That's the number of people. And so you can see the total is 496.95 that we have January of 2023. If you look at the other colored column, which is May of 2020, we had 552.7 FTEs. So you can see that's quite a difference. So quite a difference means two things. One, we had to reduce expenditures. Two, enrollment is down. So we can eliminate some FTEs and it doesn't affect us too much. I will tell you class size right now is 21.1. The only hire we've ever had was 21.4, and that was last year. So the years that I've been here, this is my second year, we've had the highest class sizes simply because of the lack of revenue, the lack of funding that we have. So with that, on the far column, the difference, it's a difference of 55.75 FTEs. In the gray column, if you're wondering what that is all of the support positions we were able to pay through ESSER funding. So 7.5 FTEs, 2.5 up top where it says teachers. Those are 2.5 reading teachers that we felt were important to put in the elementary because of the COVID gap. And I think reading intervention, I don't know if you get much more of a bang for your buck than reading intervention. That's where kids are going to be successful. So we felt that was important. The 5 paraprofessionals, those are going into the special education classrooms. So it's important to know at the end of 2024, all of those positions go away because ESSER funds are gone. And so that'll be 7.5. So we separate them just so we have an idea where we are with our ESSER funds. The next slide, I just want to go through this so that you understand where we are right now. I think people think, well, just keep cutting. We have done that, and it's been to the detriment of what we have up here. We do not have any gifted. We cut a gifted teacher at the elementary. Building coordinator at the early childhood center, which means somebody who's running all of the special ed, who's going through and making sure that we have reading interventions, somebody who's really looking at the building and what the building needs. That position was cut. We cut at the high school a math and English and a social studies teacher, and they have not been replaced. Media center specialists at the primary, elementary, intermediate, middle school was 0.5, and in the high school. So in Loveland City School Districts, we do not have a librarian. We do not have a media center specialist. in any of our libraries, which is an anomaly. That's usually not the case when you look at school districts as wealthy as Loveland. We do not have any media center specialists. So if you're wondering what they do, when kids come in, the certified media center specialist can help with reading, knows where to send the kids in terms of book and reading instruction. We do not have that. We lost a music teacher position at the high school. That was a jazz position. That is no longer there. An art position at the high school. That is no longer there. 2 physical education teachers, one at the primary elementary campus, one at the high school campus, and instructional coaches. We had 2 that were housed in our buildings, and the instructional coaches look at curriculum as well as technology. I kind of call that your R&D department. That's your research and development department. That's how we see what the latest trends are. We don't have that. Everybody right now in central office has a job to do, and that's checking boxes, and there's not a whole lot of visionary work going on, which we would like obviously to get to with the strategic vision. So I go through that. The next slide is the administrative positions. 2 administrative positions are still eliminated, the coordinator of special education and the assistant athletic director at the high school. The director of technology was cut. We went for a year without that, realized we have millions of dollars invested in our technology, and we were just having a hard time taking care of that. So what we did was we took a position at the high school where an individual retired. We did not replace that teaching position so that we could have a coordinator of technology. So our FTE count did not go up, it stayed the same. We just reallocated what we felt was necessary. The EMIS position is an Ohio data position. Used to be administrative. We took it down to an exempt so that we could eliminate some of the salary and benefits. The chief information officer resigned. In that position, we were contracting through Hamilton County, and that was Andrew Setters. We then moved to, instead of paying that contract, we could have Andrew with us permanently as our Director of Communication and Community Engagement. And
I hear that was a brilliant move.
For you, it wasn't for you. So Andrew went from working 40 hours to about 60 was the move for him. So looking at, I don't want to take too much time in my close to 10 minutes.
Yeah, I think probably getting into what happened at the board meeting last week is probably good.
Okay. All right, next steps, we have down there the staff reductions, like I just mentioned. Cash balance, we're going to have to obviously dig into because we're in a deficit. You always want to try and preserve that as much as possible. The contingency fund, there was about $1.6 million in the forecast for any emergency. We have taken that out, and we'll hope that we don't have any emergencies. The 5 FTE positions in high school busing is no longer in our conversation simply because it would require much more millage. And the fact that we could not pass a 4.9 mil levy means we need to take a look and see what needs to be adjusted because quite frankly, we need additional revenue to get things done in the classroom. That's where we are. And so the next slide this is a 4.2 mil levy. Mr. Giuffre and I took a look at 4.2 simply because if it was 4.9, busing was going to be 0.5, the 5 FTs was going to be 0.2. So looking at taking 4.9 minus the 0.7 is 4.2. If you look at inside that red box up top at the chart, when you look at the red numbers, you'll see 1.9 million, 1,827,000 in consecutive years. That shows you we are still in deficit spending with a 4.2 mil levy. It also shows you, if you look at your cash balance line, right below that, our cash balance goes from 13 million. After 3 years, you're down to 8 million, which is not a comfortable place to be. And so looking at a 4.2 mil levy, we would have to work pretty hard to get it to go 3 years. Okay, so the next option that we ran, this is 4.9. What we said when we were out talking about the November levy was a 4.9 in November is not going to be the same as a 4.9 in May. And we meant what we said. That's the way it works because we don't get the finances for a whole nother year. The way it works for the state of Ohio, you only get the finances at the beginning of the next January. So in November, if it would have passed, we would have had it this month of 23. Passing in May, we will not see any additional funds until January of 24, which means we're digging into our cash balance because of the deficit. You can see the numbers there. You can see it works better than a 4.2. You're still not out of deficit spending. Excuse me. By the third year, you're pretty close, right? And we could probably get it there. You have 135,000 in red. Our cash balance is a little healthier, goes from 13 to 12 to 12 to 10. So it's a little bit healthier, realizing it does not include the busing. It does not include the 5 FTs or the contingency. That's out of the conversation now with the defeat of the levy. Now, the next one is with the state software. What they would say would be appropriate in order to extend the levy would be a 6.5 mil levy. It's a matter of just putting in our forecast and letting the software come up with that number, and it's 6.5. You can see the first year we do have deficit spending because you don't get the funds. So 1.9 is the same for all of them. But then the next couple of years, you're out of deficit spending. You can see your cash balance looks pretty good, right? It's holding on. And the cash balance is the last thing I'll mention. I think people hear $14 million and think, personally, we all know that's a lot of money. For the district, $14 million is about 2 to 2.5 months of operating. So when you look at how you do your household budget, if you've only got a couple months of savings, it makes you a little wary, right? And so when you get below double digits with the cash, that's when you start to worry. And the state of Ohio, we had an individual from the auditor come in. They recommended 25% cash balance, and we won't be there. But you want to have a cash balance for emergencies, especially if you don't have a contingency. So I will stop. I wanted to give you a little bit of information from the board meeting, and you can watch the video. It is up if you have questions.
Well, and you mentioned, Mike, the gentleman from the Auditor of State's office coming in. Did you want to get into any, he spoke quite extensively at our January 10th meeting and gave us a lot of good information about the fiscal distress process, and there are several stages of it. Do you want to get into that, or come up in conversation?
Just real quick, I know there was, I received a bunch of emails today in the afternoon, which told me there must have been a Facebook post that generated some interest. I try not to look at it. If you like information, we have a lot of information on our website, and you can give me a call. But what was up there, and it's not wrong, it's just confusing. It's a complicated system when you talk about whether or not the state of Ohio is going to declare fiscal distress, which means you'll first start off in fiscal precaution. When I look at the numbers, the fiscal distress, if we do not have new monies by the end of this year, fiscal distress is pretty close. But Mr. Giuffre, I don't know if you want to jump into the conversation in terms of state of Ohio and fiscal distress and where it fits into our forecast.
Well, I would just say that what was described by Mr. Thompson is not something you want to experience. It is there in case we don't do our jobs, which is to solve the problem and create the solutions ourselves. The idea of having a negative cash balance is not something I ever want to experience, but that is part of what drives the state to come in. And when they come in, I believe he said to support, not to take over. Very subtly worded, but nonetheless, the end result is that when, and this is the way I look at it, if we're using our credit card to afford the things that we normally would afford with our salary, we have to pay that back at some point in time. And that's where we're at right now. And that's not, everybody knows that's not a good place for home finances, and it's certainly not a good place for school finances. So
Thanks.
All right, well, we will get things started. I think, let me go grab the bucket. Hold on. Mark LeGuillin? Am I pronouncing that anywhere close to being correct? If it, sure. All right, I'm throwing you back in the bucket then. All right, let me grab somebody else out. Walter Galladay. And if anybody wants to add their name, grab a card, throw it in the bucket. Again, just trying to keep it organic and have a conversation here.
Identify ourselves and location and everything.
We got your name. We've said it.
Okay.
You're good to go.
All right. Are there any retired folks in the room? Got a couple. You might be interested in what I have to say. In the state of Ohio, there are 607 school districts, according to what I heard last Thursday. Also in the state of Ohio, there are 210 school districts with school income taxes, 35.6% of the statewide school district population. Exactly 147 school districts have traditional income tax base in place, or 24.2% of the 607 school districts. Exactly 63 school districts have earned income tax base in place, 10.4% of the 607 school districts. This tax excludes such items as retirement income, interest, dividends, and capital gains. As such, of the 63 school districts with earned income tax base in effect, approximately 73% have earned income taxes ranging from 1% to a high of 2%. For those naysayers that say earned income tax base will not pass with the Loveland voters, I will tell you that since the early 1960s, the city of Loveland has utilized both earned income tax base and property taxes to fill their financial coffers. Should the Loveland City School District place a standalone earned income tax-based proposal on the ballot, it may well pass with the voters. As a retired Loveland resident of 30 plus years, I for one would vote for it. Thank you.
Dr. Schwetz, do you want to jump in and respond to this? Because you had a pretty extensive conversation.
To just kind of briefly review what I think of as the four main types of funding for school districts in the state of Ohio. Though there's some outliers. And I have to say that Mr. Galladay has done yeoman's work as far as making sure that this comes to the fore and stays to the fore. As a matter of fact, it was in 2019 that you first wrote that I saw about a combination of earned income tax and property tax. And I think that, let me go back and just give kind of a bigger overview and then a more specific overview. The two traditional ways that school districts finance ongoing costs is through operating levies. And most school districts do that through continuing operating levies, mostly because it gives you budget certainty. You've grown your business, you've grown your salaries, you've grown the size of your district. If you have the option of what people talk about frequently, which is a levy which is fixed in time, that money can suddenly go away if the taxpayers decide to vote against it. And you've now made yourself a $60 million business that has a $50 million income. So suddenly you have a $10 million hole in your budget. So one of the biggest problems with a fixed term levy is that it's completely at the whims of the voters at that time to decide what your budget is for the next year. Whereas it's attractive to have, we need new money. Okay, we, the voters, have said we're not ready to give you new money. Okay, well, we're gonna have to figure out how to work with the money we have. A fixed term levy, you can say, we need old money and new money. And they can say no. And all of a sudden you have to figure out how do we make up for $5 million in losses. I hope I said that relatively clearly. The second part of this is an income tax structure. And as Mr. Galladay just pointed out, several school districts in the state have income taxes as a method of finance. There's an earned income tax and a traditional income tax. And you pointed out the difference between the two. Essentially what it comes out to, though, is that a traditional income tax at the same rate will produce about a third more income. And the reason for that is that also investment gains and other types of income are taxed. So for instance, a 0.25% property tax levy would bring in I'm making this number up, $1.34 million if it was a traditional tax and $1 million if it was an earned tax. One of the problems with an earned tax is that it focuses the carrying costs of the school district onto taxpayers who have earned income. So there's a smaller number of people supporting the district. On the flip side, one of the positives of that is that fixed income taxpayers who don't have a method to increase their income and who have their home values going up in cost and have their tax values going up in cost are protected from that by an earned income tax. So there's definitely value to having that conversation. Kathy had kind of mentioned one of the problems, which is it's hard to have a conversation where you say, we need money now. An earned income tax takes about 1.5 years to completely bring in. And now you can say, we've gotten our money now. Now we'd like to talk to you about an earned income tax because we're going to have that money coming in later. There gets to be what we already have in Loveland, which is levy fatigue. And I don't mean to at all suggest that an income tax doesn't have a valuable place in this conversation. I don't think it has a valuable place in this conversation as an option for May, but as Mr. Galladay has pointed out, he's been trying to have this conversation since 2019. And I think it's a valuable one because the people that are hurt the most by our current system are retirees on a fixed income with their house values going up and their taxes going up, but their income's not going up. I hope that wasn't too much.
I just want to jump in and give Mr. Galladay a little more credit than that. He's been trying to help us get to that position since way before 2019. He's been trying to do it maybe almost as long as I've been on the board. I know he has been a great supporter of us, not always in agreement with everything that the board does, but he has been a great supporter and trying to seek ways that we can fund schools in Loveland that will work for Loveland taxpayers. So he gets more credit than just 2019. So thank you.
Sorry, I just came out in 2020.
And I think there was some conversation around this at our last board meeting. There is a longer ramp up period. Like Mike talked about, if something passes, property taxes pass, you only get new money. The new money rolls in at January 1 of the following year, whether it's November or May. And you know that that's going to be at pretty much 100% of what you are projecting it to be. With income taxes, whether earned or not, or traditional income tax, there is a period of time where it goes on the books, and then there's a period of time where people are aware of it, and your boss takes it out of your paycheck, and then it flows where it goes. So there's a longer lead time to get to full value of that. Is that accurate to say? Awesome.
And the state says 1.5 to 2 years, and Rob's opinion is that it might be even longer than that, which is practically speaking probably true. You know better than me for sure. Mr. Galladay, did you? Yeah. He's correct in that. If I didn't say clearly. The
I think the newness of it is if your property taxes are increased because the county auditor takes care of that and a lot of times communicates directly with your mortgage company. I think that the newness of it is that your employer has to have that information in order to be able to withhold it. And a lot of people, unless you live in Loveland and work in Loveland, if you're working outside of Loveland, your employer may or may not have that, may not even be obligated to withhold it if you're not in Ohio. But by the time you realize you have that, when your CPA in December of 2024 says, did you realize? That's what we're referring to, is that's the newness of it. For some folks may not realize that that's actually happened.
And
so let me just reflect. He's correct in that. And if I misspoke, I apologize. It's 1.5 years until you are able to collect the full amount. A portion of that goes in, and it's roughly 20% or so per quarter based on my understanding of the state tables, which I attached, if anyone wants to see the details, to my presentation that I gave at the board meeting on Thursday. Adam, is that part of the minutes, the PowerPoint that I did? If you want to watch the meeting, it's on there, but I also have a PowerPoint presentation that had a table to break it down. And then just one more thing, and you're absolutely right about the number of schools who do it. Typically, it's been used in districts which are rural in nature, in which there are large landowners. So no, you're right, they don't. You're correct. Yeah, you're 100%. And so you have.
I'll jump in a couple. Just a couple thoughts. First of all, when you do respond, if you could stay by the mic if you're going to interact, because we couldn't hear you, Walter. The people online couldn't hear your question, but that, I got it. I got it. I should. But I want to give credit to Walter. Walter is somebody who I've had good discussions in my office. Walter made the time to come in and talk, and I appreciate it very much. That's how we get better. And the earned income tax, I can tell you it's not a bad thing for schools because it has an inflationary adjustment. The issue you have, it's very difficult to pass. Right now, Wyoming is the only Hamilton County district with it, and it passed in 1990. It doesn't mean you're going to get away from property tax either, because unless your entire budget is funded through earned income tax, the inflation is going to catch up to it. I also know normally your earned income tax is going to be in rural areas where they're property rich and maybe income's not as high. So they don't want to pay property tax because they have a lot of property. So the income tax that Loveland has was passed in 1960, which may have been the case. People may have had more property than the income, and the income has increased over the years. But I think it's all good discussion. History will show you earned income tax is very difficult to get passed in a wealthy district. People like their income. And the last thing I'll say is Loveland already has a 1% earned income in the city. Whatever we add, that means it's going to be 1 point something to somebody's income tax. And that 1 point something could even be 2, and that's a lot. But I hear what you're saying, Walter, and I appreciate it. And I think it's worth conversations as we move forward.
And just one more is that that point, I believe, is the best way to protect seniors or people on fixed incomes. That's the way to protect that group of people.
Right.
Austin Smith.
Hi. Well, for those who don't know me, my name is Austin Smith. I am the student representative or one of them on the Board of Education. I also am a part of the LHS Student Support Loveland organization. And like Mr. Broadwater said at the previous board meeting, I am here today to share the results of our high school-wide survey regarding the levy and overall school concerns. Before Christmas break, we did a school-wide survey. In just 1 week, we were able to collect 63 responses from students, and I had the opportunity to sit down with an additional 7 to further discuss their concerns and ideas. When prompted on the survey, how students would vote for, or how they would vote on the levy, 95% of students responded that they would vote yes, and the 5% that said that they would vote no primarily listed the reason that they did not know enough about the levy or the situation that the school is in to be able to make a decision. I think that the biggest takeaway of that is that almost all students see the need for a levy and are passionate about our schools being the best they can be. But I believe that we can make the number of yes voters go up to 100% if we can better educate students and the general public of the need for the levy. So my first of 3 questions is, I lost it. How do we better advertise the need and the details of a levy to the community?
Well, let's go to our Director of Communications.
Mike, do you want to jump in and answer that?
Can I, as a person who's had to
Yes, you have
think
had this
about
conversation more than most of us.
advertising tax issues over quite a few years, you know, we're always looking for better ways to make sure that everybody knows. So there are volunteer groups, there are PACs that can help us get the information out. The district is allowed to give information about the financial situation, so we can tell people about the situation. Our challenge has always been that we are fairly easily able to communicate with our school community, but communicating with the community at large is a little bit more of a challenge. And so that's something that we always look at. How do we get that information out? But it's an age-old question, and we try.
Next, am I good to keep going? Okay. In the free response portion of the survey, we ask students to write about what needs to be changed in our school. And the most common answer was regarding the lack of busing for underclassmen at the high school. So second question is busing more a funds problem, or is it just the lack of bus drivers? Like, will the levy be able, I saw the graphs and stuff, but is it more of the lack of bus drivers, or is the levy kind of the fix to it?
Well, I think, yes, the lack of bus drivers is a problem. We are struggling to transport the kids that we have to transport right now. In fact, a lot of our purchase service costs have gone up because we have to transport some of our special education students to other facilities, which we normally did with our drivers. We do not have drivers to do that. So you have to contract out, and that's more costly. The other part of it is when you look at the high school transportation, it's not in the millage there. I think it depends on what the board lands on and what the board's priorities are. But as of now, when we were out discussing the November levy, it's going to be hard to bring that back if we didn't pass in November, simply because you've lost a whole year of funding. So I guess the biggest pressing issue right now is having enough drivers. Once we would have enough drivers, then we would look and see, is it possible fiscally or not? Is something more important than that? And I'll always say the classroom has to come first, but then you look and see, is there a possibility? And I think, it's also looking at how you're going to run the organization over the next 2 or 3 years. I hope over the last year and a half that I've been here, people can see I don't really like spending money. I like educating kids, but I don't like to spend money. So it'd be nice to be able to have a plan if that's something we wanted to do. If the board said, Mike, figure that out, I would try, but the first and foremost, you got to have the drivers.
And then the final question, after sitting down with the students that volunteered to spend more of their time, I got to interview them for 30 minutes throughout this last couple of months, and every student thought that the best way we could get the community to back the levy was to increase school pride, and we thought that the best way would be to increase the number of the state of our schools, so we can kind of show the community what Loveland Schools is all about. So the final question was, can we do that? And if so, how do we schedule more state of the school events, and what kinds of things do you believe should be showcased?
It's a great question. I love state of our schools. It's a lot of work to put together, but we used to have them in February. We just did one in October so that we could get out ahead of it. It's not a bad point, Austin. We could take a look and see how maybe what I do is come over and let the students figure it out for me, how we could do it. Because you guys are a lot smarter than me, I know that, but I don't think that's a bad idea in terms of getting them. One thing I asked our building administrators to do was find a way to get grandma and grandpa in, find a way to get them in and see what we do, because until a lot of the times people don't see what we're doing in these buildings each and every day. And I see a lot of our staff members here, they're giving it 110%. They love what they do, but it's hard work. And to see just how much we take care of kids, I think it would be great to see not just grandma and grandpa, but some of the other individuals that don't necessarily utilize the schools to be able to come in. And so maybe finding a way to do a state of the schools where we could kind of focus on the individuals that Dr. Lorenzo is talking about, which is, it's easy to get a hold of parents because they're captive, but the other people, that's the one that's hard. So we could sit down and think about that one. I like that.
I try to be careful, excuse me, I try to be careful with the ideas I come up with, because it usually ends up making work for somebody else. But just a little bit of history of the state of the schools. What originally started was a traditional State of the Union, State of the State address, and it was the superintendent who gave a talk about how the schools were doing. And I think I think it was quickly realized that while that was really great, it was not what people really wanted. And so it changed into this come to the high school, but see representatives for every building. So the idea that occurred to me, we have any building principals here? They're going to love this. We could possibly think about having a state of LECC, a state of LPS, LES, so that you have a big one once a year, but that you have a sort of a community. We also used to take school board meetings around to each of the buildings. That's probably not possible now that we have recording and all that. Plus, it wasn't all that fun to sit on the little chairs at LECC, but we did it. So anyway, it's a great idea. I agree with Mike. It's a great
Yeah.
idea.
So State of the Schools kind of evolved into what we've been calling Showcase Night over the last couple of years, which we had back in October. And it's a chance to really throw open the doors and get people into the buildings. We sent out a mailing to everybody in the community, tried to get them in. It's a chance to see what our students are doing, to find out ways that they can connect with the different organizations like our boosters and our PTO groups and our foundation. And Mike did a little talk there, but yeah, you're right. Having Mike talk for an hour is probably not going to get people in the door.
I can always dance.
Well, I saw you. That's debatable. Did you have any other thoughts you wanted to share, Austin? Appreciate it. Would you mind pulling the next name? Austin. Kim Lukens? Is that right? All right, come on up. And while you're making your way up, we're going to try to hear as many people as we can. If you want to throw your name in the hat and you have a thought that popped into your mind, that's great. We're going to try to be respectful of everybody's time and keep the conversation going until 8 o'clock, or you run out of questions before that.
This is just a few thoughts. I'm a 45140, and I am 60, and I'm retired, and I had no children go through Loveland. St. Margaret of York, Royalmont, all Catholic Christian. And I agree with the gentleman that talked right now, just before me. It's just awareness, you guys. I mean, I don't know how many people live, in Loveland City or 45140 or I drive through and I see Loveland, the schools all the time, even though I'm 45140, right? I'm Warren County. I'm not voting, right? I'm voting for Little Miami, but I mean, there's a lot of us that drive through the area. So, I mean, I don't really know. I mean, all the tax information and all the, 1 year, 1.5 year, and all that detail. I mean, people aren't going to go on the web and they're not going to spend 3 hours. People aren't going to come here. I mean, I'm not going to come here, all the time. I mean, you can't penalize me, you guys. It's just not, where I am. That's not why I moved where I moved. I moved because of other reasons. So you said that you had a lot of ideas for information and communication. I'm not sure, I don't know everybody's name, okay? But, and I'm not trying to be critical, but it's definitely awareness. It's education and awareness. And I don't know what the answer is, but I know that when I saw all the signs go up, I thought, what in the world is going on? I mean, it keeps on, the levies don't pass over and over and over. You call it levy fatigue or whatever. And I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I do believe, though, it's just something needs to be, I don't know. I don't know. Put something in Kroger. I don't know really but I know that's all I have to say as far as that goes. And then, I mean, how much of the expenses do you guys put towards the building and the maintenance and all of that? I don't know where the crossover is with that, as far as taking some of that into, as far as the amount of money that you would put for the staffing and that.
So what we have, Kim, is we have a permanent improvement fund that we cannot use as general fund. So the permanent improvement is used to maintain the buildings. What we're talking about with a levy, operating levy, would be general funds. So it's separate. And so we're able to maintain the buildings. And I think the issue you brought up is the age-old issue of how do you, and I can look out in the audience and I can tell you there are retired individuals that I've met in driveways and in back patios, and we spent a lot of time out. And the analogy I used one of the last meetings was when you step in the ballot box and go to vote, you've probably educated yourself about who do I want as my state representative? Do I want this person or this person? There has to be a modicum of interest of educating yourself, and I don't mean to,
Oh, there
yeah,
has to be responsibility.
right, and I don't mean to be critical,
No,
but
you're right. I mean,
yeah.
true.
So, to your point, that is, we started community newsletter. I saw Andrew had the QR code. You could pop it, you can get on the community newsletter.
Yeah.
But to your point, we could give you virtually every financial metric I could give you, Kim, is going to show us below average of any district. Of the 607 districts in the state of Ohio, we're below average when it comes to spending.
Yeah.
I could give you all sorts of numbers.
Well, you've convinced me, but I don't vote. I'm 45140,
All right.
so I would say
We'll get
pass
some
the
people
levy,
together,
but,
would you,
you
Kim,
know,
and let's,
I'm just
Have you
saying.
considered moving?
I think if you had ideas,
I mean-
original thoughts on how we could do it, or anybody here, that is the population that is difficult that I would love to find. We try, or it's not for a lack of trying, but it's finding a way to do that.
Yeah.
But Kim, I think you hit the nail on the head since I've been here, which is the question of how do you reach the previously unreachable? The school bubble, as I'll call it, is very interested and engaged, and it's easy to reach them because their children are in school and they work
Absolutely.
at school.
Absolutely.
And there's a group of people who are very engaged in making sure that we keep taxes as low as possible, and they're easy to reach as well. But there's a big middle ground that won't
Right.
pay attention until they're like, wait, school levy? Didn't we just have this? You know, so I agree, and it's definitely a challenge and a problem, and I wish I had an easy answer, but we'll keep plugging away at it.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't come up with
Yeah.
No,
an
and
answer. I just,
Bring us
I'm a real
solutions.
outsider, you know, I've only lived here for 2 years and I've, you know, been focused on, really not on the public school system in general, but you know, we have to educate our future. So anyway.
It's
I
like, so,
mean, it's easy for me to see.
no, I get you. And
But
as
really
the
easy.
communications person, I have these
Yeah.
kind of conversations with people all the time. Somebody brought up the other day, oh, you know what? It used to be great when we had our own newspaper, you know, and there was the Loveland Herald and people said that. And then I also, you know, I pushed back a little bit and I'm like, well, if everybody read that, why did it go away? It is great to have more channels, right, to reach people, and those are the kinds of things that I think about too. But it's a challenge.
Maybe all the churches need to pray at their petitions every Sunday or Saturday.
You know,
Honestly.
the reverend on our board was at the last town. You want to grab the next name out of there? All right. Mark, is this late enough for you? All right, excellent. Welcome. Come on up.
For the people speaking, if you could make sure you talk into the microphone, I think some people are struggling to hear at home.
Okay.
Thanks, Mark.
My name is Mark LeGuillen, longtime resident of the community, graduated from Loveland. My children graduated from Loveland. I always hear about us achieving lower. How do we do that? How do we do the excellence in education anyway? But that's really not the question. Let me go through a couple points I'd like to make, and then I'll ask a question at the end. First of all, for those of you who are here from the school board, on levies, you're 0-3. Makes a very large statement. Whether you're talking about education, whether you're talking about sports, whether you're talking about any area of life, 0-3 is terrible. To my understanding, through the history, there has never been a real serious set of discussions in regards to school tax and earning income. I heard Mr. Doherty's dissertation the other night, had a birthday during the dissertation. And it was very informative and very great. And he pointed out the concerns of the long term before you get the money. My concern is, where has the school board been for whatever length of time, not thinking out of the box with a split levy that is earned income and school tax with a smaller burden on the taxpayers? To my knowledge, that hasn't happened. It's been, my understanding in the last levy, it was almost dismissed out of hand with very little to no discussion. And I understand it's easy to go to the taxpayers and the property owners and say, more money. This is easy. We have an easy solution. Pass a levy, give us more money. There will always be those who question how well the money's spent. My concern or my opinion is that everybody needs to pay their fair share. Currently, that's not going on. The burden is on the homeowner, the property owners. Those who aren't, and a great point was made about the earned income and the school levies or the school taxes and how that's generated. Very informative. But why wasn't that conversation in 2019, in 2020, in 2022? I believe that if the board can come up with a good quality split levy, earn the trust of the taxpayers with a term levy, I believe you have a better chance of passing a levy if everybody understands they're going to pay their fair share. I've heard a school tax isn't fair because the number, if I recall the numbers, 7,500 of the taxpayers are property owners. If you would go to the other variety of taxing, it's 9,500. Okay, I realize some of the numbers are going to be smaller, but everybody's paying their fair share. And it's sort of been dismissed out. If I looked at the graphs, and I haven't studied them, I haven't spent the time to do that, but I understand if a 4.1 or 4.7 levy passes, am I correct that there will be a need for another levy within 3 to 5 years? That's the question.
I can give an answer to that.
Good.
The way that schools are funded in Ohio, you will always see return to the taxpayers for more money, because that's the only way that schools increase the money they get.
Okay.
And if you do an income tax, there's some inflationary value built in, but that's just a small chunk of your overall tax burden, so it's not enough to keep up with inflationary costs.
Okay. My next question would lead into, where has the school district gone statewide and petitioned the legislators to fund the schools correctly? I understand that it's been 15, 20, 25 years ago, it was deemed unconstitutional, and nobody's challenging it because it takes money. But every time that comes up, somebody says, oh, Mr. Broadwater, I'll challenge you to head that. Go to every superintendent you know. I'll charge you with a task. Go to every superintendent you know, have the school children, the teachers, everybody put out a campaign to send an email to their legislators and expect change. Now, is that easy? No. But that is truly either 10% cut across the board resolves the problem, or getting the legislators to correctly fund the schools is the real solution.
So if I respond to that, Mark, a couple things jump into my mind. I appreciate your thoughts, and we've had good conversations, and I appreciate you coming in and chatting. I had Representative Schmidt in my office Friday, and Gene Schmidt, and having a discussion about the state funding and what really, the part that I think maybe we have a chance at looking at is, why is the lack of business not in the state funding foundation model? In other words, Sycamore has a lot of business, right? They're about 60-40 when it comes to property versus business. We're 90-10, so that hurts us.
I understand.
So that's the discussion I had with her. I had 5 legislators in last year to discuss it. The fair share funding model, I was part of the discussions. That was 2 years ago. That was changed to where the legislators believed it was more fair. What I can tell you is, for every Loveland City School District that thinks it's unfair. There are a lot more school districts that think this is great. We're getting plenty of money. And it's because their money is coming from wealthy districts like Loveland. And so I agree with you 100%. It's a state funding model issue. What I do know is I've been at this for 36 years and it's been this way for 36 years. And I don't want to sound negative, but state legislators represent their constituents and a lot of their constituents are pretty darn happy with where it is because they're not doing this. And so I don't want to sound like I'm complaining, but I understand why Loveland residents are upset. I can also tell you that's why we try and keep it as low as possible. And Mark, the other thing I'll respond to is I think when you stepped up, you said, well, we got a perfect report card. We're excellent. So why do you need more money? And the fallacy of all of that is when you look at, we don't produce widgets, right? We can't increase price of any product or anything like that. So if our budget is 50 million one year, it's going to go up the next year because people get cost of living adjustments. I think we all think teachers or staff should get 1 or 2%, whatever it is. So over the course of time, you'll see that it's going to grow, right? It just has to because wages are going to grow. So what we try and do is when there's retirements or resignations is take that 35-year, and the retirement system didn't help us because they're making teachers teach longer, so the wages are higher for longer, and so it's increased there. So what happens is if you look at any school district, it's going to be a climb. What we try and do is make it as small a climb as possible through negotiated agreements. The teachers taking a zero, and I know there's steps there, but it is a big part of it. But I'm with you 100%. The state funding model is probably not a good thing for Loveland, but I don't get to say that. I try and do what's best for the district and for the kids and be responsible. And right now, we're on the verge of some things happening that aren't going to be very good for the community. And I'll go back to the earned income tax and the income tax. We've been trying to educate people on property tax, and it's taken a long time to try and educate them on the earned income tax. And I appreciate the fact that you paid attention to Mr. Doherty's presentation. It's a lot. It's a lot to figure out. So what I would love is to pass a minimal levy. I would love to see it. I do not like doing levies. I'd love to see it go 4 or 5 years if we could. But in the meantime, do exactly what you're saying and say, hey, state, doggone it, it's going to be tough to sustain this for wealthy districts. It's tough to sustain this.
Well, and my feeling is that by pushing at the state collectively, there may be some districts that love it, but if in the fair funding, they turn out to be in the same place, it shouldn't be a problem. Here's what I hear again and again. The lottery was supposed to fix it, if you remember the year, okay? All that money, no problem, it's gonna fund the schools indefinitely. Then it became gaming. Gaming's gonna fix it. So I guess as citizens and districts and people paying the money, we need to put their feet to the fire collectively throughout the entire state. And that's why I would love you to lead that charge. And you have all sorts of children that would love to participate in that. You have all sorts of teachers that would. You have taxpayers. I'll put it this way. The yes would agree and the no would agree.
I agree.
I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses, but I do want to counter the notion that we've not talked about, that we don't talk about income tax. Since I've been on the board, we have had a community committee that talked about income tax, and we got a resounding no out of that committee, that they didn't want an income tax. The Planning Commission talked about income tax and did not come to the board with recommendation. So all I'm saying is we do talk about it. I understand the frustration. We're not doing it, but it has not been something that has gone without the notice of a school board. As far as lobbying with the state, agree a little bit with what Mike says. There's a danger in lobbying with the state because I'm not sure Loveland is going to come out on the good end of what the state does. I did spend a year of my life as a school board member driving back and forth to Columbus on a governor's task force to come up with a pupil spending-based form of paying for education. It was widely publicized across the state. There were superintendents that were part of it, legislators that were part of it, teachers that were part of it, school board members that were part of it. And we actually came up with a funding formula. And at the end of that year, the administration changed and the legislature changed, and the work was thrown out the window. So dealing with the state sometimes is frustrating as well. That's not to say we shouldn't do it. I'm just assuring you that this board, at least over the years, has tried to do some of that. I'll take your point that we've not been successful, but we have tried. Thank you. Thanks.
Real brief. If you want to find out, run a 1.9, a 0.25, and a 0.25 as 3 separates and see what you get on the earned income, school tax, and a levy, operating levy.
I mean, we were having a conversation about state funding earlier today, and the analogy I made is for Loveland, you may have to convince the state to grow the size of the pie. We don't really like the way the pie is sliced, right? As far as our piece of state funding. But trying to convince somebody that we should have a bigger slice of the pie means they get a smaller slice of the pie. And there's a lot of school districts that don't want to give up their little bit. But growing the pie means change, like that money's got to come from somewhere else. So it's that you're wrestling with those kinds of issues. And that's not easy to convince people to get on board with.
And I just chime in, that going back to paying your fair share, it is very frustrating to me to say, it makes a lot of sense to say the state's going to kick in $6,000 per pupil no matter where you are. That would be paying your fair share. But Loveland has been determined to be wealthy enough that we can afford to pay more than our fair share, which is why we're here.
Well, and that's something that we've talked about also. When we say Loveland's wealthy, that means that the state of Ohio looks at the numbers and they compare us to other districts. And compared to a lot of our neighbors and other parts of the state, folks who live here are better off. That's what we're saying. When they look at income, they look at property values also, right? And so when they run the numbers, they say you get this much. And they look at other districts and they say this community can never support their schools because they don't have the income and they don't have the property values. And so the state funds them. And as bad off as we are, we're still better than what the formula spits out, right?
Right, that gets into the guarantee, and it's a difficult conversation. But Rob, what we receive per student from the state funding model is what?
Well, we are currently funded at approximately just under $3,000 a student. But what the Cup Pattison, our 2 representatives that toured the state quite extensively, talked to all kinds of audiences about their model. But where we are as a district is that 91%, if we were a formula district, 91% of what the state funds us at would be local share. We are on a guarantee, so we're not paying 91%. And the guarantee then is something that can be phased out with stroke of a pen every biennium. So every 2 years, they have a decision to make. This funding formula, we're in the second year. It's got 4 more years to be phased in. And it is not going to do Loveland any favors. The amount of our guarantee will rise to above $9 million by the end of the funding period.
Do you have an idea what the average state funding is? Probably not a fair question, but.
So every district has a base cost that's different.
Right.
Which makes it easier to understand. But about half of the districts in the state, currently there's about 247 districts that are on a guarantee. The rest are formula districts. And one of the things about the limited I heard earlier is a misconception, is that the districts that are using limited term levies, we're able to convert those into substitute levies. And I know that's a lot of words, but they're at the 20 mil floor. The 20 mil floor allows them to have inflationary-based revenue. And for Loveland, that's not a possibility. We would have to double in value for that to even be possible.
Can I try to translate some of
Hey,
your
please do.
thoughts? And you tell me if I'm right. When you say a guarantee district as opposed to a formula district, there is a school funding formula, and they look at a bunch of different stuff. They have statistics about every district all across the state. And they put all this stuff in and they spit out a number that says, you get this much. And they looked at our number and they said, that ain't a whole lot of money. We're going to guarantee that you get this much. So if we were not on the guarantee, we would be getting less.
Yes.
So that's how messed up the school funding formula is for a district like Loveland, as opposed to a more impoverished district in another part of the state. They run those numbers and it spits out a number that's bigger than what we spend per student, all in, state, local, federal, all that money. It spits out a great big old number. So your criticism of the state funding model is absolutely right. We just happen to be on the short end of the stick, and there's a lot of people that go, I like that funding model. I'm in a lower income district. I'm never going out for a levy because I'm getting tens of thousands of dollars per kid. Meanwhile, we're getting $3. And the rest gets made up by our community because that's the way the funding model is kind of built, with the assumption that the community has the means and the willingness to support. I think it's something else that we've talked about, is the idea that asking for a levy means we've somehow not managed our money right. And the state funding model says that's how you make up the difference, is school property tax levies or income tax levies or other means. It becomes on the community as opposed to the money coming from the state.
I'll give you the average, and this is going to be a guesstimate, but I think I'm pretty close. The average funding for school districts in the state of Ohio is about $6,500 per student. Okay. So if Loveland's receiving, say, $3,500, I think it's pretty close, the average district is getting $3,000 more per student. Okay. So what's that mean? We have 4,300 students. You get $3,000 more dollars. You're looking at $12 million. That's a big deal, right? So that's where we say this, the state of Ohio, and I don't mean to be pessimistic, but when you're a wealthy district, the state funding usually doesn't go up. The good news is you're a wealthy district. The bad news is we're a wealthy district, right? That means more onus goes on to the property homeowner. And then the double whammy is we have very little business. We're not, there's other districts in Ohio that have the same problem. I think we've got the 39th lowest percent in business. There's 38 other districts out of 607 that have less business, but that's pretty high. But that's why we have nice neighborhoods too, right?
Well, and to put that in context, that's why people get, when you talk about property taxes, homeowners versus businesses, right? If you're in another part of town, there might be an office park that's worth millions of dollars. And to get, so the money that they pay to the district, it would take dozens and dozens of houses in order to make that up. So I think that was the conversation you said you had with Representative Schmidt, is the idea, like, factor that in, and the fact that this is on homeowners as opposed to business owners. That's a very different kind of scenario. We've talked enough. Let's get another.
Sorry, let me just chip in two
Oh,
quick
yeah.
things. The first one being that Rob's point about the guarantee is an existential problem for here that would bring this crisis to a head, which is we only have that guarantee for 4 more years, and they've promised us that it will go forwards, but we've all seen how state promises work. So theoretically, 4 years from now, we could have a $9 million hole dropped on us. And that's just not going to work. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. The second thing is, going back to the concept of a wealthy district, it's a huge problem, because you can look at people in Loveland and say, okay, wealthy, not wealthy, wealthy, not wealthy, but everybody has to pay taxes. And especially when it comes to property taxes on properties that are going up, this is why we've seen our community argue with each other so much.
Yeah, and I tried to clarify that, because I think people hate the idea of throwing that wealthy label on it, but it's not something we come up with and say, well, you're wealthy, because I know I'm not, and I know a lot of other people aren't. But that's kind of the state of Ohio looks at us compared to other districts. And now we're done talking. Josh Hendrickson. Welcome.
To be honest, I had no idea what I was going to say when I got up here. I'm Josh Hendrickson. I live a stone throw away in a small ranch house. One of those ones that you bought for really good price 5 years, 6 years ago, ballooned in price, and so property levies would definitely hit me. You may not know, I'm a minister at a church far away from here, small little church that can't afford a pastor. I do it for free. I'm able to do that because I have a very nice job. I'm the editor-in-chief of a large tech news site. I put the Herald out of business. I'm very sorry. I have a job that you're supposed to have a college degree for. You know, I should have a master's or a bachelor's or a PhD in writing. I don't have a college degree at all. I'm one of the many people who started college and then realized that's no way I'm going to ever afford that. I'll be in debt for the rest of my life. I quit. I teach people who have college degrees how to write better. I edit people who have college degrees how to write better. I'm able to do this because I have a strong foundation given to me by elementary and middle and high school teachers who were fantastic to me and taught me so much. And even our PhD and our MD and whatever may be. You all started with a strong foundation in schools that were local to you. You couldn't have gotten there without your elementary, your middle, and your high. They're so important. Our schools are just so incredibly important. They deserve our support. And I think throughout all this, we've gotten so angry with each other. It's just frightening at times. The comments I saw, I was there, was frightening. The things I've seen proposed at times are frightening. We drown out reasonable voices. The first gentleman who spoke, reasonable voice. You're a reasonable voice. You have a reasonable concern. We need to protect our seniors on fixed incomes. We need solutions that are nuanced. And that's the problem. This is all nuance. And you can't quickly educate nuance. I said it last time I was here. We have a financial problem, but we have an educational problem. We haven't educated our community well enough how important this is, how bad this is, how difficult this is, how to solve this. And there's no one quick solution. But unfortunately, what we need right now is a quick solution and then long-term solutions. I believe, listening to the gentleman in the back and to you, sir, and to your presentations, that it's not going to be just a property tax that's going to solve this problem. It's going to have to be a combination of things that's going to solve this problem. But we're in a place where we can't do that right this instant. I've heard people say, why haven't you talked about these things? But I've watched you talk about these things. I've heard people say, why haven't you considered an income tax? But I watched you put together a big presentation, wonderfully put, by the way, sir. I felt more educated from your PowerPoint than I had studying it myself. 3.5 hours that meeting was, and I hear you didn't talk about it. Well, maybe it's because it was 3.5 hours. We're 5-minute people. That's my job, is reaching the 5-minute people as an online news person. Fast as possible. What doesn't work, what you get is people who understand broad subjects, but they don't understand the depth, the inner knowledge. You missed the PowerPoint. And the PowerPoint was good. Hard to read on the orange, but oh, we all have criticisms, right? I feel bad for this board because no matter what they do, no matter what they decide, about half of us are going to hate them for it. And the other half probably still don't like you much either. But we need to solve this. These schools are the most important thing, the most important thing in our entire community. I wouldn't be where I am. I wouldn't be educating people how to write without my middle school, without my high school. I had amazing high school English teachers that set me on a path where I can be a minister to a church that can't afford a minister. We have an education problem. And one of the biggest education problems I've seen, left and right, this question I've seen over and over again is, if you as the board believe in this levy so much, why don't you tell people? They don't know why. You can't. I had to learn myself. I asked that question once. So I'm supposed to use this to ask you a question. let you put some input, not just be passionate speaking. But I'm a minister. You gave me a microphone. I can't help it. Would you let them know why you can't just go out there and individually as board members, why this has to be an unofficial board? I've seen people asking that. Why didn't the whole board come to this? They don't know. They don't know. This is an education problem at its heart. So I'll stop so you can answer some of that.
Thanks.
Well, I will mention that, we had another town hall meeting, and I believe, I didn't check everybody's online profile, but I'm pretty sure that all 5 board members watched that town hall. So, that we could get the information. And I know that other board members are watching this evening. But you're absolutely right. We can't have a meeting and have a discussion where in a board meeting we say something about voting for something, because we're not allowed to spend district money to sell a levy. We're allowed to let people know the situation of the district, but that's pretty hard. That's pretty hard to get all that information out to all the people. We have had campaigns where there is literature that's mailed out. We've had campaigns where people have gone door to door. I have gone door to door in Loveland many times. I haven't done it recently. We've gotten a lot more doors than when I started on the Board of Education. But when I ran for Board of Education, I went to every household in Loveland and let them know I was running for Board of Education. It's very hard now to get to everyone and get their attention for more than 5 minutes to get the information out. But we do try. We do try.
No, just to clarify, when we say campaign, we cannot run a campaign. There is a political action committee, Loveland Supports Loveland, that does all of that. And so the communication piece is very difficult. You can imagine as a superintendent, for me to have all 5 of my board members to have a conversation, we have to have a business meeting. So it happens once or twice a month. And so I'm making individual phone calls, and same with the campaign. Once if something's put on the ballot, they take over the campaign, and I'll try and give out as much information as I can and go out to as many groups as possible. But we are not allowed to participate in any of that, spend any district money, tell people to go yes, no, maybe so. We just can't do it. And so I think you're right, Josh. I think a lot of people don't understand that. Why are just 2 board members here, and just kind of the way the Ohio Revised Code is written. So it's a good point.
I'll release the microphone. I just want to stop by saying, look, we have a huge problem. Our schools need funding. Our teachers deserve funding. They deserve support. They deserve raises. I've seen people say that we could fix the budget by not paying them for sick days, and that just makes me want to vomit. One of my son's teachers was in a car wreck. Someone rear-ended him. He tried to tough it out. He ended up having to go to the ER. He had a concussion. He was working with concussion. The idea of not paying sick days makes me want to vomit. We have a real and complicated and difficult issue before us, and no one's going to agree on any one thing. The levies proposed aren't perfect, and they're admitting it right up front. The 2 of them won't solve the problem for more than a couple of years. Admitting it right up front, we have what we have. We can only do what we can do. We have to do something. We also have to look towards those more complicated, nuanced solutions that solve the problem down the road. We have to listen to all reasonable voices on all sides and ignore the rest. Thank you.
Jordan Oman. Sorry if I'm butchered your name. Oman? All right.
Thank you, and my name is Jordan. As you heard, I'm a newer resident. I've been in Loveland for a little under 3 years. So I don't know if that's new or not. I have 3 kids that attend our schools here. So shout out to the LPS, LES, and LIS teachers and staff if you're here. Thank you so much for all you do for my kids, and probably dealing with my emails and my wife's emails occasionally. Hopefully not too okay. Right, yeah. So as when I moved here, did a lot of research on schools. We knew we wanted to send our kids to the public schools, and we settled on Loveland. And certainly, when you look online, we saw all the chatter about the levies and whatnot. And so now, after living in the district for a few years now, I would say, certainly the circle that I run in, my family runs in, lots of families, a lot of individuals who support or did support the levies. But most recently in the November ballot, I did come across some individuals who were very staunch and against the levy, and to the point where there's certainly a group of them that no matter what is shared, what the outcomes are, they're not going to vote for a levy or an increase. But the theme to me was very common amongst all those individuals, and they felt like that there was not the accountability in place for the school and the district and their spending to match with what was being proposed on the increase. And while we've talked a little bit about tonight, yes, the communication's out there, the information's out there. I think we have to take a hard look at the type of information that's being shared, how it's being shared, and what needs to be done differently. I say this because we have the 5-minute folks. We have people who will watch a Zoom for 3 hours. People will come to meetings. Some who will answer doors, some who will not answer doors. So how do you reach all these folks who are looking for communication in different ways? And I know these are questions that you all ask yourselves and ask of one another. But one thing that I've not seen, and maybe I've missed it because I know there's a lot of information out there. So if I have, please let me know. But I've not seen like a real, and I don't think debate's the right word, but a real conversation between individuals who are very pro levy and some who are just absolutely against it. I'm not talking about Facebook posts or anything like that because that's not productive, as we all know. But a real conversation where you can have a mediator sit down and say, what are the issues? Why will you not vote for this? Would there other, be anything to vote for, or reasons why you would? I think it could help bring the community together in ways where you can have a civil conversation, difficult conversation, but have it in an appropriate way. The second thing is, I think there needs to be some, just to look at some of the KPIs in transparency, like I mentioned before, that we look at as a district. You show, hey, here's all the things that we're cutting. It's informative, it is helpful, but should we already be at that point in terms of those staff ratios or the cost per teacher and whatnot? I don't know those answers, but to me, it's like we're cutting, we're doing this, doing that, but should we have already been doing that for the last 5 or 10 years? I don't know the answer to that, but I think some of those items would be very helpful as well. And then the last thing is, we talk about some of the other districts. I was writing numbers down, so I may have this wrong. I think you said there's 36 other districts with roughly the same split that we have in terms of business revenue or business tax in 30, yeah. So have we been able to learn anything from those districts that would be helpful for our district to consider, not only for the short term, but for the long term, in terms of, engaging our city or chamber to entice and try to grow more business revenue? What are some of the other things that they're doing? So I know, sorry, I spoke a lot, and I think I said 3 questions, but there's probably about 10 in there. So thank you.
Feels like there was good food for thought in there. Not sure that there's answers this evening for those, but certainly things to think about. Because as you said, you know, a board member might sit up here and say, I've been accountable, I've shown this information, but if that information is not getting out, then we have to figure out how to get it out better. So anyway, some very good thoughts. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, and to your point of having good, rich, meaningful conversations with people on both sides of the issue, I think that's kind of what tonight's about too, is giving people a chance to get together and talk and have conversations. I do like the idea of people being able to bounce back and forth maybe more directly. But yeah, I think that's kind of the idea of this a little bit.
And I think that's, again, as Kathy said, great food for thought. But one of the things that I have unfortunately gotten focused on is how do we control our budget? What do we cut? What can we do? How lean can we run? How can we do this without hurting kids? And in my opinion, we've gotten pretty darn close to that point where there's not a lot of cutting left. So one of the things I think is one of my weaknesses is that I'm like, look at all this stuff we cut already. What else do you want from us? Whereas the reality is a better message might be, look at how great we're doing right now. You know, look at the fact that we're one of the top districts for the state report card. Look at the fact that we provide, I always forget the name of the report card that I show the slide all the time, where we spend less money per student, but
Return on investment.
Right. So we spend less money per student, but we do better on state testing than other districts. So there's a lot of positives out there that I think that we should probably work to focus on making sure that those messages get heard just as much as, if not more than, look at all the stuff we've cut already and what else do you want us to cut?
I think there's a double-edged sword though too, right? When you talk about that piece of it, if I can, I think you need to start pushing out, like, what's the ugly that's going to happen if this doesn't pass? We talk about, well, there's not going to be busing for high school students. There's already not busing, right? And so the district has learned to live with it, whether you like it or not. But what's going to happen when the state comes in and not take over, but
Helps us.
You know, I mean, we got to be real with what some of those potential outcomes could be. So, thank you.
We've got one card left, so if anybody, this is last call, if anybody wants to jump in, we've got time left to have more discussion, but I'm going to put this over here. Someone wrote a question rather than asking to come up. Question for the board and Superintendent Broadwater. My son will be a freshman next year. He's taking honors classes and an AP class next year. I'm very worried about the availability of these classes next year. What can you tell us about the availability of these classes in the event of further cuts? It was addressed to the board and Superintendent Broadwater. So you're off the hook on this one, Rob.
I'll go.
Don't we always send the cut questions?
That's
to
right,
Mike?
exactly. I'll go first just so Mike gets a chance to think about what he wants to cut first. The reality is we will do everything we can within our abilities to not cut additional programs, because my personal feeling, and I cannot speak as the entire board, is that we've already cut as much as we can without hurting kids more. So we invested money in bonds to try to get $50,000 more dollars. And of course we invested it when interest rates were extremely low. But the reality is at some point, those programs will have to be cut and you'll have to go to the state minimum. That's what the state's here to help you do. That won't happen, at least in my mind, for a couple of years, because it takes us getting to a negative cash balance. I'll make sure that we spend every bit of the cash balance that we have before I hurt kids more.
Mike, did you have a thought?
I do.
I figured.
These are difficult conversations, and Jordan, I didn't really respond to what you had to say from the standpoint that you had very good points. The reason, as a superintendent, I love educating kids. I don't like levies. I have a family I love hanging out with, and in the evenings all night talking about money is not the best thing, but it's the best thing for our kids and our community right now. So I'm going to do it. And the 4.9 in November was the responsible thing to do. I don't know when it got to a point in education that we have to say, what are all the threats before we pass a levy? I don't know when that happened. I wish it wasn't there. The reason I took the time at the beginning is we have made a lot of cuts. You need to understand that. So when we talk about cuts, we aren't talking about 10 teachers here, 3 teachers. When you talk about a $3.5 million deficit, that's not cutting 1 or 2 people or cutting out middle school basketball or cutting out going to a 2-mile radius for transportation. That is going to change the face of Loveland City Schools. And I'm not here to be fear-mongering or anything like that. It's been a decade. I was in my 40s before the last time we had additional revenue, okay? And I get kind of passionate about when people say, well, what are the threats? Well, the threats are we're going to hurt this school. We're going to hurt these kids. And in May, when it comes into May, we're going to have, if we are on the ballot in May, we will have difficult conversations about what does that look like? How do we preserve as much as we can for kids without hurting them? Because a $3.5 million deficit when we get there, again, that's 50, 60, 70 staff members. We don't, 90% of our budget is staff. That's what it is. You can't cut out, we're only going to make 2 copies instead of 3. We're only going to use 1 pencil. We are to the point where, kind of what Dr. Swetchenow said, we are on the precipice of really doing damage to this school district. And so in May, we'll have conversations, what's it look like? If we have 10 or 15 retirements, resignations, that'll help. We'll try and push, preserve the cash balance as much as possible. What I can tell you is we have May and we have November of this year, right? After that, if we don't have additional funds, we're not getting additional funds until 2025. And you're not going to like what you see, okay? And that's not me trying to be dramatic. It's me telling you, you're not going to like what you see, and I'm not going to like what I see, and our staff is going to start to get the picture of maybe this isn't the place. I can tell you I go to superintendent's meetings on a monthly basis. What's Loveland's reputation right now? You can't pass a levy. You can't pass a levy, okay? And so, and I'm not trying to preach, I know, but at some point we need additional revenue to just do what we are doing. The threats are going to be the state of Ohio is going to come in. Next year it might be a fiscal precaution, but it's a pretty slippery slope and it goes pretty quick. And when they say that they're going to help us make decisions, they are going to take the decision making out of my hands, out of Mr. Giuffre's hands, out of the board's hands. And they're going to say, you know what, we're going to a minimum day. We're going to a 6-hour day. We're shutting down these facilities and you're not going to be able to use them. Nobody's going to be able to use them. You need to save money. And so what we are trying to do, Mr. Giuffre, the board, myself, is be responsible and tell this community we need some additional revenue to maintain what we are doing, or these threats become reality. And the reality is in May, even if we're on the ballot, there are going to be cuts. If it's 10 staff members, when I say cuts, it's going to be retirements and resignations, and we're going to try and move staff to make sure we're not hurting kids. But at the end of the day, we need additional revenue at some point. That it's plain and simple. And if you're any type of financial person, if I were to put up 4.9 in November, if it passed, you had busing, you had 5 FTEs, you had a contingency. We could have gone about 4 or 5 years. That's out the window now. So here we are in May. Okay. So 4.9 or whatever it's going to be in May, the earlier you do it, the longer you can extend it. And I hope you're getting the understanding that I do not enjoy levies. I don't enjoy doing this at all. Do I get angry with the state of Ohio? Yes, I do. I do. Do I wish people in this community would get angry at the state of Ohio instead of me and instead of the board? Yes, I do. It's not set up appropriately, but I don't get to whine and complain. I get to do the best job in the world, which is take care of kids. That's what we're trying to do. And I'll leave it at that.
All right. John Herbin.
Okay, thank you. So John Herbon, we've lived in Loveland for about 12 years, I think, this January. So I appreciated that you made the notice at the beginning, Mr. Broadwater, about the comments last time. That took care of some of the things I was going to say. One thing, someone mentioned earlier, accountability or maybe transparency and so forth. You know, I honestly don't understand some of those criticisms. So as an engaged community member and as a parent of multiple children in the Loveland School District, the statement that the board isn't being truthful or transparent, it just doesn't resonate with me. So I don't think it takes a lot of time either to listen to some of the focused board discussions or to read online to get pretty educated on where we're at, the actions the board has taken. We hear these summaries often in these interactions, which I think is great. Yeah, you got to repeat the message. So I just want to let you know, I think you've worked very hard to be open and available, and no doubt you've suffered some unfair criticisms in the process, but I do think you've done a great job, and I've been part of some of those larger community engagements, like last summer with the vision, strategic vision and so forth, and saw what they were looking for in terms of community involvement. I'll put my glasses on so I can read. So I guess I want to get to a question. I had some other supportive statements. We will support the levy. We understand the need. I'm convinced of the need. And I've seen the things that we've lost, and I'm convinced that we would love to have those back, but at least we need to maintain the quality that we have. I am curious as to what we understand about, so this is to my question, what we understand about the, say, 6,500 people who decided against last fall's levy. What do we understand about what they would offer as an alternative? One thing I often tell my employees when they bring complaints or they're frustrated about what, you know, things at work or whatever, it's like, well, what's in your sphere of influence that you can actually change? And that's what we can talk about, right? You can't talk about, it doesn't, you can express sadness or frustration, but in the end, it doesn't get you very far until you've actually considered what your real options are. And so I know that the board hears a lot from the larger group that expresses, you know, either criticism or don't want to vote. I'm just curious if anywhere in there, you know, are there solutions that are brought forward? It's like, yes, we agree that we should fund our schools, or we agree that we should spend at least as much as we're spending today, which is somehow in the lower level of per pupil spending. But here's how we should do it. Here's a different way to do it. Just to say, you know, I don't like it, it doesn't go anywhere. And so I'm just curious because I don't know all the information that you receive from people or suggestions. I really appreciated the discussion about the income tax. My second question, just to follow up on that question, was, or on the discussion was, in the school districts where that has been used, is there, because you mentioned, I think the reason that you haven't gone for it is the challenge in getting something like that passed, a split levy or whatever it may be, that it's just been very hard. I was just wondering if there's any information that says, here's how that worked. Here was the situation or the arguments that made that a more palatable solution for the community in such that they passed it. And why does that or does that not maybe line up with Loveland's sort of demographics or the things that you've heard in terms of why people won't immediately support the property tax levy as the sole source? So I guess those are two questions. What do we understand about those who would say no? And really, what are their offered solutions back? Because I don't think it's helpful to hear much else other than here's the other option I want you to consider. And then, yeah, what makes Wyoming what made Wyoming successful in that? How do you consider whether Loveland would or would not be successful in that option?
Do we know when Wyoming,
Yeah, it was 1990. And since, John, since 1990, Wyoming has had levies up. So it's not taking care of the, it's not the end all be all. They've still had.
Of course,
yeah.
understood. Just answering some of
Sure.
the offerings and questions.
and a couple things that I had heard was that there was opposition because the income earners preferred to pay property tax rather than income tax in our situation here. The people that I heard from personally, there was a sense that it was better for them at the time that we talked with them with this committee that we had, over the years, that it was better for some people to pay property tax than to pay income tax. They were going to be, they didn't want to pay an income tax. I have been frustrated over the years because advice that we've gotten from people who passed levies or didn't pass levies was, well, you need a lot of education for an income tax. And so the question is, well, when do you start that? Because if you're on this 3-year property tax cycle where every 3 years you need some inflationary money, every 3 years you're educating for a property tax, when do you stop and educate for an income tax? And so you say, well, we've got to get the property tax. Well, you get it. And then they say, well, you don't need to educate for an income tax because you just got your property tax. I mean, it's a vicious cycle. As far as hearing from no people, my issue has been, I believe I've listened to a lot of people, and I don't think either side of the issue is a homogeneous group. There are folks who feel like public education doesn't need any more money. There are folks who feel like they're paying as much as they can. They don't want to pay any more money. There are folks who would desperately want to support schools, but feel they are economically at the point that they cannot afford any more here in Loveland. There's such a variety of no's and there's such a variety of yeses. There are the pure, I support public education, so I'm going to vote for a levy whenever it comes up. There are the parents, there are the grandparents. For the no's, we also have people who say, I don't have kids in school anymore, so I paid my money, I don't need to pay money anymore. So, there's all those levels of why people vote, and you have to speak to all those people and simply make your case that what we're trying to do is provide excellent education in Loveland. I don't know if that helps your question at all, but.
I certainly understand the challenge. And yeah, I was just curious, again, I didn't hear in there sort of the alternate solution. Like, I'm voting
No,
no
I
because I don't
haven't
like the
either, so.
structure of it, other than other tax structures, right? Or other than fixing the state, situation. When I think about, okay, so when we did the calculation, like this is what our extra bill would be. And I think about property tax values. I think about the fact I mentioned last time that, we didn't move to Little Miami at the time because they couldn't pass a levy. I assume other people made similar decisions. That has to affect a community over time, probably more monetarily than, the incremental property tax that they pay on the house, on the value of their house. So for people who, I get that the near-term cost is there, but in terms of the overall valuation of the community and the strength of the community and how it draws people in, it would just be an important consideration. So.
And I just pitch in that we moved to Loveland in 2005, and we were looking around at different neighborhoods and houses, and one of the neighborhoods had empty lots in Goshen School District, and one had empty lots in Loveland School District. And in 2005, there was a $30,000 difference in the cost of a lot, and Loveland School District was more expensive than Goshen's.
And John, in speaking with some real estate agents, one office that I know of, speaking with them today, they have a long list. I think they said over 26 families that are waiting to see what happens in May to see if they're staying in Loveland. And I don't think it's an idle threat. I think it's families that have the wherewithal to just determine where they want their kids to be educated. And so property values are a part of the equation. How quick you see it, I don't know, but I think it seems pretty commonsensical that it's part of the equation. And I want to say, Jordan, thank you for your questions. I got a little fired up on my last response, and I appreciate you getting me fired up, but thank you, and I appreciate it.
Sharon Shepherd.
Hello, I am Sharon Shepherd. I also spoke last time and I didn't actually intend to speak this time, but since you had time, I figured I'd take it. I appreciate the passion with which you asked or you answered the last question, Mr. Broadwater. I think that even sitting here and with the 5-minute response that people have and people are watching from home and not either able to or wanting to, I think there's both situations, engage right now. I'm seeing responses about the question of the state, the state coming in and what is the state of our finances and what would that look like? And I know you had a board meeting and I know you had the state auditor here, but I appreciate the frank discussion and explanation that you just gave the community that I think will be seen more than by whom is in this room right now. I have all sorts, similar to last time, I have all sorts of things, but they're not organized particularly well at the moment because as you sit here, I think all of us start to have all those conversations in our head of what's important. So I'm just going to do my best. One of the things is that we've talked about is that this issue is an immediate issue. And it's that question of how can we be a problem-solving community versus a problem-finding community? How can we move forward with this? Because I think if I understand it correctly, we had a state auditor come present a few weeks ago. And if I understood the presentation correctly, as I watched it at a later time, that it looks like based on what we need to do as a school district is submit to the state a 5-year financial forecast. Thank you. I knew it was one more F. 5-year financial forecast to the state in the spring. We do it twice a year, in the fall and in the spring. And the moment that we do that in the spring and show that we will be in deficit spending, which I think is what's going to happen, will show that we'll be in deficit spending within the next 3 years. That will flip us into precautionary or fiscal distress at the precautionary level. Is that correct? Okay, so we are absolutely going to flip into that no matter what, because even if we pass a levy in May, we still have to submit that in the springtime. But even if we passed a levy, if it happened to do it, those funds wouldn't come in to assist that financial forecast yet. You can't submit that. Okay, so you don't, if we pass something in May, we could avoid precautionary fiscal distress.
The forecast changes because it's been approved, and so you're counting on it so that those forecast numbers
Okay.
change, is the short answer.
And can I just say, because I'm not hearing the answer from over here, there's a difference in what the state looks at. It's not just deficit spending. It is a final year-end balance. So it is a certain percentage of year-end balance that would then cause them to look at it and say, so it's not, we are currently in deficit spending. And actually, depending on a levy that would be put forward, would actually stay in some deficit spending, depending on the levy. But it's that ending balance at a certain point that they look at, and when it goes below a certain percentage, that's when they begin to look about whether they would put you in caution, distress, emergency.
Okay, so if I understand it, if we did nothing in May, we'd submit it and we'd go into fiscal distress at the precautionary level. Okay, you would submit it and then that would push us into that if we did nothing in May. Okay. So in order to not enter into that stream of conversation with the state, something has to happen that shows a change to that projection. I appreciate Mike's presentation, Mr. Broadwater's presentation, that showed the 3 different levies. I think that it is clear that even with the 4.2, there's a possibility that you would delay the entering into fiscal distress, but it's only for a year or 2, if I understand it correctly. And the 4.9, because again, it would be delayed, the funding wouldn't come until January, that would give us maybe 2 to 3 years, I think, if I'm reading, understanding it correctly. As a community member who moved here a few years ago, who moved here for the schools, who came from out of state, I looked at all of the surrounding districts and some of the things that everybody says about what makes Loveland what it is. We don't have the businesses, but we're also not a Mason. We're not gigantic. We don't have 4 different, I don't know Mason really, but the idea that some of the bigger districts, the reason we came here was that there was one high school. There weren't multiple high schools. You had one high school, and some of those bigger districts with the bigger business base are now bigger. They're less of a community, if you will. They're a bigger school district that runs differently than ours do. The other question, sorry, I'm all over the place, but the other thing that you've brought up at some point, and you put it in your presentation, Mr. Broadwater, was that you listed there were 7.5 staff members, I believe, that were supported by ESSER funding, which is COVID funding, which if I understand it correctly, they are there right now to help alleviate the gap that has been created by COVID over the last several years, that if anybody has any children in their life, whether they are theirs or someone else's, they know that any child has had some deficit, whether it's mental health, whether it's education, there's all sorts of challenges. So right now there's 7.5 staff members in place by ESSER funding, which that's going to run out. When did you say?
2024.
Okay, so that also is going to go away
Correct.
regardless of what happens to a levy.
Correct.
And no matter what levy you put in, well, if you put any of the levies that you put up in your presentation, if I also understand correctly, you had a 4.2, a 4.9, and a 6.5.
6.5.
All of those were strictly to maintain the services that we have. They don't add any additional services, no matter what. It just extends the timeline. And I think one of the things that there is absolutely levy fatigue, and I've only lived here 3 years and I already have it. I came here with it because I moved from a community where we fought about, we didn't call them levies. They were a referendum every year, and every year we had this conversation. Every year we had to talk about, why do you think it's worth adding 1% to the school budget this year? Why do you think it's not worth adding 1% to the school budget every year? That conversation was every May. It's challenging and it's hard, but the reality is, if we don't have the conversation now, if we don't make a choice to invest in our schools now, we're going to have the conversation again very quickly, and it's not going to be our conversation to have anymore if the state comes in and starts to give direction as to what it is we can do as a community to help our schools. And the other piece of that is, that it was mentioned by someone, I can't remember who, but there is a portion of the community that did move here for the schools, did move here for the community. But for certain families and individuals, if they're capable, if you have a student that's in that 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade right now, and you're telling me that in a year you don't know if you're going to have what you have right now at the high school, I'm out. I might not leave the community. I'll still have to pay taxes in the community, but my kid's out. Because you can't support a community without the school system. And so I hope, as the Board of Education, I appreciate you taking the time to do this and answer questions and listen, but I hope that you really consider longevity for the school system, and you consider budget consistency. Is that the phrase you used? You used a phrase about longevity of funds, that it's not just a year that we have to come have this conversation again, or 2, that you really think about trying to make it last longer. Sorry, I didn't have any questions.
No, that's great. The last person who's got their name in, brace yourselves for impact, Terry Bean. If you don't know Terry Bean, it's because you haven't met her yet.
I'm Terry Bean, and I'm probably going to take a little bit more of an unconventional approach up here. As most of you know me, that's typically my approach. But I think that everybody here would agree that it is unfortunate that we have to pass a levy. Would you not all agree that it's unfortunate? But we are in that position, and we are in this together because we are a community, and we are a community of goodness, I have found. I moved here 15 years ago, and I moved here from, well, I won't say where because it's from north, but we moved here for this community and we researched this community and we came down and we visited many different areas before we chose Loveland, not just because of the name, but because of what it represents. And it represents love amongst us as people. And I see that time and time again. When we moved here, I chose to work in this district. And thankfully, I got chosen to work in this district when I interviewed. And I've been here 15 plus years now. And it is a community of faith. I am a person of faith. And I believe in the goodness of this community. I believe in our board, who time and time and years again show passion, and they show vision, and they show a passionate vision for our community. The efforts to which I see you go to, and you could so easily be defeated, and yet thankfully, none of you are. I'm so thankful and grateful all the time in that. I believe in you all. I believe in our community. I believe in our staff. I believe in our students. I believe in the work that we're doing. I believe we can overcome this hurdle that has been presented upon us. And I guess my question for you is, did you guys see the rainbow the other day? Did you see the double rainbow, some of you? Well, keep believing in it because it promises goodness on the other side of it. And I believe we're here to be on that other side. Thanks.
Mike, don't respond to that.
I am not following that, no. Thank you, Terry.
We're running right up to the end of our time. I'm looking back at what we talked about earlier on, and I don't know that anybody gave everybody in the room an update as to where we are in the process of considering levy solutions or levy. Dr. Lorenz, maybe if you want to talk about what happened at the last board meeting and what you anticipate going forward.
I can do that. I also was just going to try and sum up and say how grateful we are for the turnout at both this town hall and the last town hall. We tried to have one once, well, we've had things over the years, but we tried to have one and it got kind of thwarted by COVID. We had a party and nobody showed up. So this has been very good that we have had people show up. And what I heard tonight was, even though it means more work, we still have work to do for awareness. We still have work to do to show that we have been accountable. We still have work to do to show that we are seriously considering the idea of some kind of other tax other than a property tax. But for the short term, what we have is another meeting coming up on January 31st, where the board will consider whether or not to put a tax on the May ballot. And we have asked that 3 different levy amounts be certified by the county auditor so that those would be the choices that we would have, a 4.2, a 4.9, and a 6.5 levy. And that is the date by which a May ballot issue needs to be put as a resolution to go on the ballot. So there will be discussion, more discussion about levy. We know that Mr. Broadwater doesn't like to talk about levies. We say that all the time. I've been saying that since I moved here, and I said, wait, what? People have to vote on the taxes for schools? I came from a state where the state decided if your budget was legitimate or not, and then told the taxpayers what to pay. And this was like, wait, we have to ask people to up their tax? Who would want to up their taxes? I mean, it just, so you have to be in support of public education. You have to be in support of the Loveland community to pass a tax levy. And so that's where we are. From last week, when we asked to certify those issues, to the 31st, where there will be a decision by the board about a May issue. Does that answer that question?
Absolutely. Any other closing thoughts from anybody? I'll just say thank you all for coming. And I'll also say that a lot of what we talked about is the need for communication, and I don't take that lightly. And I also would say that you're all deputized to help us spread the word. Mike spends a lot of his day talking to people on the phone and answering emails and having meetings with folks, and we're all happy to do it, reach out, encourage other people to reach out and find out more information. So Thank you very much. Have a great night.